The military aid is also an official act, am I right?
So the lockdown.
Yes.
This is not President Trump's personal bank account he's writing a check from. This is $400 million of U.S. taxpayer money, is it not?
Absolutely.
And there was a logjam in which the president would not write that U.S. check, you believed, until Ukraine announced these two investigations the president wanted, correct?
That was my belief.
Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your opening statement, Ambassador Sondland, you detailed the benefits that you have gained from obtaining some additional documents over the past few weeks. Is that right?
In terms of refreshing my recollection.
Right, because reviewing these documents has helped you to remember the events that we're asking about. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because you acknowledge, of course, that when you can place a document and a date and a context, it helps to jog your memory.
That's correct.
And so you would agree that for people unlike yourself who take notes, that is very helpful to their own recollection of events, right?
I think you asked your question backwards. Are you saying people that take notes, it's helpful to have those documents, or people that don't take notes, it's helpful to have those documents?
No. You are not a note taker, right?
I'm not a note taker, never have been.
But you would agree that people who do take contemporaneous notes generally are more able to remember things than people who don't.
Some, yes.
And there are additional documents that you've been unable to obtain, is that right?
That's correct.
And I think you even said in your opening statement that the State Department prevented you and your staff from trying to gather more documents, is that correct?
Certain documents, yes.
Which documents?
Documents that I didn't have immediate access to.
And who at the State Department prevented you from doing that?
You'll have to ask my counsel, he was dealing with them.
But certainly based on the additional memory that you have gained over the past few weeks from reading the testimony of others based on their notes and reviewing your own documents, you have remembered a lot more than you did when you were deposed. Is that right?
That's correct.
And one of the things that you now remember is the discussion that you had with President Trump on July 26th in that restaurant in Kiev, right?
Yeah, what triggered my memory was someone's reference to ASAP Rocky, which was, I believe, the primary purpose of the phone call.
Certainly, so that's one way memory works, isn't it? And you were sitting in a restaurant with David Holmes in Kiev, right, having lunch?
I think I took the whole team out to lunch after the meeting, yeah.
And it was a meeting, a one-on-one meeting you had with Andrei Yermak?
Again, trying to reconstruct a very busy day without the benefit, but if someone said I had a meeting and I went to the meeting, then I'm not going to dispute that.
And particularly if that person took notes at that meeting?
That's me. I'm always like,
Or
if
sat outside
someone
the door
else
when you didn't let them in?
took notes,
I
I
have no control over
trust
who
their
goes into
notes.
a meeting in Ukraine.
Yeah,
That was
there's
the
no need for me to
Ukrainians.
do the
I'm
same.
not going to
And you
dispute
had also
their
met
notes.
with President Zelensky, among others, that day, is that right?
That's correct.
And you called President Trump from your cell phone from the restaurant, is that right?
Right.
And this was not a secure line, was it?
No, it was an open line.
Did you worry that a foreign government may be listening to your phone call with the President of the United States?
Well, I have unclassified conversations all the time from landlines that are unsecured and cell phones.
Antonio, stop.
If the topic is not classified, and it's up to the president to decide what's classified and what's not classified, and we were having, he was aware that it was an open line as well.
And you don't recall the specifics of holding your phone outside, far away from your ear, as Mr. Holmes testified, but you have no reason to question his recollection of that, do you?
I mean, it seems a little strange I would hold my phone here. I probably had my phone close to my ear, and he claims to have overheard part of the conversation, and I'm not going to dispute what he did or didn't hear.
Well, he also testified that you confirmed to President Trump that you were in Ukraine at the time, and that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass, unquote. Do you recall saying that?
Yeah, it sounds like something I would say.
Yeah, quote, sounds like something I would say.
That's how President Trump and I communicate, a lot of 4-letter words. In this case, 3-letter.
Holmes then said that he heard
Total
President
bros.
Trump ask, quote, "Is he," meaning Zelensky, "going to do the investigation?" To which you replied, "He's going to do it." And then you added that President Zelensky will do anything that you, meaning President Trump, ask him to. Do you recall that?
I probably said something to that effect because I remember the meeting. President Zelensky was very solicitous is not a good word. He was just very willing to work with the United States and was being very amicable. And so, putting it in Trump speak by saying he loves your ass, he'll do whatever you want, meant that he would really work with us on a whole host of issues.
He was not only willing, he was very eager, right?
That's fair.
Because Ukraine depends on the United States as its most significant ally. Isn't that correct?
One of its most, absolutely.
So, just so we understand, you were in Kiev the day after President Trump spoke to President Zelensky on the phone. And you now know, from reading the call record, that in that phone call he requested a favor for President Zelensky to do investigations related to the Bidens and the 2016 election, right?
I do now know that, yes.
And you met with President Zelensky and his aides on the day after that phone call. And then you had a conversation with President Trump from your cell phone, from a restaurant terrace, and he asked you whether President Zelensky will do the investigations. And you responded that he's going to do them, or it, and that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to do. Is that an accurate recitation of what happened there?
It could have been words to that effect. I don't remember my exact response.
But you don't have any reason to dispute Mr. Holmes' recollection, correct?
I won't dispute it, but again, I don't recall.
After you hung up with the president, Mr. Holmes testified about a conversation that you and he had, where he says that you told Mr. Holmes that the president does not care about Ukraine, but the president used the more colorful language, including a 4-letter word that you just referenced to. Do you recall saying that to
I'm looking
Mr.
all
Holmes?
over for this.
Again, I don't recall my exact words, but clearly the president, beginning on May 23rd, when we met with him in the Oval Office, was not a big fan.
But he was a big fan of the investigations.
Apparently so.
And in fact, Mr. Holmes said that you said that President Trump only cares about the, quote, big stuff that benefits himself. Is that something that you would have said at the time?
I don't
At the
think I would
time.
have said that. I would have honestly said that he was not a big fan of Ukraine, and he wants the investigations that we had been talking about for quite some time to move forward. That's what I would have said, because that's the fact.
Mr. Holmes also remembers that you told him, in giving an example of the big stuff, the Biden investigation that Rudy Giuliani was pushing. Do you recall that?
I don't. I recall Burisma, not Biden.
But do you recall saying, at least referring to an investigation that Rudy Giuliani was pushing? Is that something that you likely would have said?
I would have, yes.
Now, even if you don't recall specifically mentioning the Biden investigation to David Holmes, we know that it was certainly on President Trump's mind. Because just the day before, in his call with President Zelensky, he mentions specifically the Biden investigation. And I want to show you that exhibit, or that excerpt from the call on July 25th, where President Trump says, the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. President Zelensky then responds with a reference to the company that he's referring to. And two witnesses yesterday said that when President Zelensky actually said the company, he said Burisma. So you would agree that regardless of whether you knew about the connection to the Bidens, at the very least that you now know that that's what President Trump wanted at the time through the Burisma investigation.
I now know it all, of course.
And at this time you were aware of the president's desire, along with Rudy Giuliani, to do these investigations, including the 2016 election interference investigation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you said President Trump had directed you to talk, you and the others, to talk to Rudy Giuliani at the Oval Office on May 23rd. Is that right?
If we wanted to get anything done with Ukraine, it was apparent to us we needed to talk to Rudy.
Right. You understood that Mr. Giuliani spoke for the president, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, President Trump
catching
also
up
made
with
that
some
clear
news
to
today.
President Zelensky. In that same July 25th phone call, he said, Mr. Giuliani is a highly respected man. He was the mayor of New York City, a great mayor, and I would like him to call you. I will ask him to call you along with the Attorney General. Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he is a very capable guy. And after this, President Trump then mentions Mr. Giuliani twice more in that call. Now, from Mr. Giuliani, by this point, you understood that in order to get that White House meeting that you wanted President Zelensky to have, and that President Zelensky desperately wanted to have, that Ukraine would have to initiate these two investigations. Is that right?
Well, they would have to announce that they were going to do it.
Right, because Giuliani and President Trump didn't actually care if they did them, right?
I never heard, Mr. Goldman, anyone say that the investigations had to start or had to be completed. The only thing I heard from Mr. Giuliani or otherwise was that they had to be announced in some form, and that form kept changing.
Announced publicly?
Announced publicly.
And you, of course, recognize that there would be political benefits to a public announcement as opposed to a private confirmation, right?
Well, the way it was expressed to me was that the Ukrainians had a long history of committing to things privately and then never following through. So President Trump presumably, again, communicated through Mr. Giuliani, wanted the Ukrainians on record publicly that they were going to do these investigations. That's
Wow.
the reason that was given to me.
But you never heard anyone say that they really wanted them to do the investigations, just that they wanted to announce them.
I didn't hear either way.
Now, your July 26th call with the president was not the only time that you spoke to the president surrounding that Ukraine trip, was it?
I believe I spoke to him before his call.
And that would be on July 25th, the day before.
Yeah, I think I was flying to Ukraine and I spoke with him, if I recall correctly, just before I got on the plane.
So that's two private telephone calls with President Trump in the span of 2 days. Is that right?
Correct.
Antonio, what?
You had direct access then to President Trump, correct?
I had occasional access when he chose to take my call. Sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't.
Well, he certainly took your call twice as it related to Ukraine on these 2 days, is that right?
He did.
Now, the morning of July 25th, you texted Ambassador Volker, and we could bring up the next text exchange, at 7:54 a.m., and you said, call ASAP. Ambassador Volker did not respond to you for another hour and a half, and he said, hi Gordon, got your message, had a great lunch with Yermak, and then passed your message to him. He will see you tomorrow. Think everything in place. Volker, though, an hour before that, and about a half an hour before the phone call, had texted Andrei Yermak, a top aide for President Zelensky. And he wrote, good lunch, thanks. Heard from White House. Assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down date for visit to Washington. Good luck, see you tomorrow. Ambassador Sondland, was this message that Kurt Volker passed to Andrei Yermak the message you left for Kurt Volker on that voicemail that he referenced?
You know, I don't remember, Mr. Goldman, but it very well could have been.
You don't have any reason to think it wasn't, right?
Again, I honestly don't remember, but seems logical to me.
And if Ambassador Volker testified that he did get that message from you, you have no reason to doubt that,
No, if
right?
he testified that he got that message from me, then I would concur with it.
So is it fair to say that this message is what you received from President Trump in that phone call that morning?
Again, if he testified to that, to refresh my own memory, then yes, likely I would have received that from President Trump.
But the sequence certainly makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does.
You talked to President Trump, you told Kurt Volker to call you, you left a message for Kurt Volker. Kurt Volker sent this text message to Andrei Yermak to prepare President Zelensky, and then President Trump had a phone call where President Zelensky spoke very similar to what was in this text message, right?
Right.
And you would agree that the message in this that is expressed here is that President Zelensky needs to convince Trump that he will do the investigations in order to nail down the date for a visit to Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, I'm going to move ahead in time to the end of August and early September when you came to believe, I believe as you testified, that it wasn't just the White House meeting that was contingent on the announcement of these investigations that the president wanted, but security assistance as well. You testified that in the absence of any credible explanation for the hold on security assistance, you came to the conclusion that, like the White House visit, the aid was conditioned on the investigations that President Trump wanted. Is that what you said in your opening statement?
It is.
So let me break this down with you. By this time, you and many top officials knew that that coveted White House meeting for President Zelensky was conditioned on these investigations, right?
The announcement of the investigations. Right.
Thank you. And that includes Secretary Pompeo, right?
Many people.
And, well, Secretary Pompeo
Yes.
and Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney.
Yes.
And you testified that this was a quid pro quo. Is that right?
I did.
And you, at this point, by the end of August, knew that the aid had been held up for at least 6 weeks. Is that correct?
I believe I found out through Ambassador Taylor that the aid had been held up around July 18th is when I heard originally.
And even though you searched for reasons, you've never given a credible explanation. Is that right?
That's right.
And
Wow, it all
no one
started
you
on my
spoke to
birthday.
thought that the aid should be held, to your knowledge. Is that right?
I never heard anyone advocate for holding the aid.
And now, by this point, at the
So
end
it's
of
all
August,
my
the
birthday
public and
present.
Ukrainians knew about it, right?
I believe there was some
Well,
press reports.
everything is about me, isn't it?
Who knows? But I think at that
It's not
point
that
it became sort of common knowledge that everything might be tied together.
And in fact, President Zelensky brought it up at that September 1st meeting with Vice President Pence that you were at, right?
I don't know if he brought it up specifically, but asked where the aid was. I think was more. I think he sort of asked. Again, very vague recollection because I don't have a readout of the bilateral meeting. But why don't I have my check essentially?
And you
Wonder how
you
long
understood the
it'll take you to
Ukrainians
think it's
received
sitting on
no
a
credible
sweater.
explanation. Is that right?
I certainly couldn't give them one.
So, is this kind of a 2 + 2 = 4 conclusion that you reached?
Pretty much.
It's the only logical conclusion to you that, given all of these factors, that the aid was also a part of this quid pro quo?
Yep.
Now, I want to go back to that conversation that you had with Vice President Pence right before that meeting in Warsaw. And you indicated that you said to him that you were concerned that the delay in the aid was tied to the issue of investigations. Is that right?
I don't know exactly what I said to him. This was a briefing attended by many people, and I was invited at the very last minute. I wasn't scheduled to be there. But I think I spoke up at some point late in the meeting and said, it looks like everything is being held up until these statements get made, and that's my, personal belief.
And Vice President Pence just nodded his head?
Again, I don't recall any exchange or where he asked me any questions. I think it was sort of a duly noted.
Well, he didn't say, Gordon, what are you talking about?
No, he did not.
He didn't say, what investigations?
He did not.
Now, after this meeting, you discussed this pull-aside you had with Mr. Yermak where you relayed your belief that they needed to announce these investigations prior to the aid being released. Is that right?
I said I didn't know exactly why, but this could be a reason.
And obviously you had been speaking with Mr. Yermak for quite a while about a public announcement of these investigations, right?
We had all been working on toward that end.
And so you indicated to him that in addition to the White House meeting, security aid was now also involved in that.
As I said it could have been involved, yes.
Now, I'm going to show you another text exchange you had on September 1st, where Ambassador Taylor says to you, "Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations?" And you respond, "Call me." Ambassador Taylor recalls that he did call you, and you did have a conversation. And in that conversation, you told Ambassador Taylor that the announcement of these investigations by President Zelensky needed to be public, and that announcement was conditioned on, that announcement would ultimately release the aid. Do you recall that conversation with Ambassador Taylor?
Again, my conversation with Ambassador Taylor, my conversation with Senator Johnson were all my personal belief, just based on, as you put it, 2 + 2
See,
equals 4.
he was obviously on
Well,
that
in
sneaky
that-
shit.
in
That's
his
why he wasn't
testimony, Ambassador
texting.
Taylor says
He
that
was
you
like,
said
call
that
me.
President
He was
Trump
like, I'm not
had
gonna
told
send this in the text
that he wanted
and
President
incriminate
Zelensky
myself
to
publicly,
state publicly
like y'all
as of
niggas are
September
doing.
1st. Do you have any reason
I
to
will.
doubt
Why don't you
Ambassador
call
Taylor's
me?
testimony, which he
I'm not
said
gonna be
was
all
based on
messy and
his
text it.
meticulous
But you
contemporaneous
could
notes?
call me.
President Trump never told me directly that the aid was conditioned on the meetings. The only thing we got directly from Giuliani was that the Burisma and 2016 elections were conditioned on the White House meeting. The aid was my own personal, guess, based again on your analogy, 2 + 2 = 4.
So you
He's
didn't
like,
talk
y'all
to
not
President
thinking
Trump
about how
when Ambassador Taylor
2
says
+ 2
that
= 4,
that's what
but
you told
like,
him? Is that your testimony here?
My testimony is I never heard from President
then
Trump
you gotta multiply that
aid was
times
conditioned
5,
on an announcement
because
of elections.
So,
obviously we're
You
gonna
never
get
heard those
indicted.
specific words,
Correct.
right? But
Never heard those words.
That equals 20
well, let's move ahead because you have another conversation
to life.
in a little bit later that both Tim Morrison and Ambassador Taylor recount. But in this September 1st conversation, Ambassador Taylor also says that testified under oath that you said that President Trump wanted Zelensky in a public box. Do you recall using that expression?
Yeah, it goes back to my earlier comment that, again, coming from the Giuliani source, because we didn't discuss this specifically with President Trump, that they wanted whatever commitments Ukraine made to be made publicly so that they would be on the record and be held more accountable, whatever those commitments were.
You also testified, or Ambassador Taylor rather testified,
I
that you
get
told
so
him that
simple.
you had made a mistake in telling the Ukrainians that only the White House meeting was conditioned on the announcement of the investigations, and that in fact everything was, including the security assistance. Do you remember saying that?
When I referenced a mistake, what I recall was I thought that a statement made by the new Ukrainian prosecutor that these investigations would be started up again or commenced would be sufficient to satisfy Mr. Giuliani / President Trump. As I recall, my mistake was someone came back through Volker or otherwise and said, no, it's not going to do if the prosecutor makes these statements. The president wants to hear it from Zelensky directly. That's the mistake I think I made.
Do you have any reason to question Ambassador Taylor's testimony based
Antonio?
on his meticulous and careful contemporaneous notes?
I'm not going to question or not question. I'm just telling you what I believe I was referring to.
Let me fast forward a week and show you another text exchange which may help refresh your recollection. On September 8th, you sent a text to Ambassador Taylor and Ambassador Volker. Can you read what you wrote there?
Guys, multiple convos with Zelensky, POTUS, let's talk.
So this was September 8th at 11:20 in the morning. And Ambassador Taylor responds immediately, now is fine with me. And if we could go to the next exchange. Ambassador Taylor then 15 minutes later says, Gordon and I just spoke, or 20 minutes later rather. I can brief you if you and Gordon don't connect, speaking to Ambassador Volker. Then Ambassador Taylor, an hour later, says the nightmare is they give the interview and don't get the security assistance. The Russians love it, and I quit. You would agree that in this text message, after you had spoken that earlier, an hour earlier, with Ambassador Taylor, that he is linking the security assistance to this interview, this public announcement by President Zelensky. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And in fact, Ambassador Taylor testified that you did have a conversation with him at that point, and that you told him that, just as your text message indicates, you did have a conversation with President Trump prior to that text message. Does that help to refresh your recollection that you, in fact, spoke to President Trump at that time?
Again, I don't recall President Trump ever talking to me about any security assistance, ever. What this tells me, refreshing my memory, is that by the 8th of September, it was abundantly clear to everyone that there was a link, and that we were discussing the chicken and egg issue of should the Ukrainians go out on a ledge and make the statement that President Trump wanted them to make, and then they still don't get the White House visit in their aid. That would be really bad for our credibility. I think that's what he was referring to.
So you do acknowledge you spoke to President Trump as you indicated in that text, right?
If I said I did, I did.
I mean, if I said
that
I did, but like currently, I may not recall.
Still under the impression that the aid was contingent on these public announcements.
I did not get that from President Trump, but I was under the impression that absolutely.
I mean, I didn't get it from the guy that you want me to say I got it from, but I do know that.
That the aid was conditioned on the public announcement of the investigations after speaking to President Trump.
By September 8th, I was absolutely convinced it was.
I am convinced of that information, but not in the way that you want me to say that I was convinced of it.
Because that would have changed my entire.
I don't remember, because that would change the flow of information to be a flow chart that you want me to have said, but I'm on this flow chart that I dictated earlier. Don't try to throw me off, nigga.
Now, Ambassador Taylor also testified that, and Mr. Morrison, both of them testified, that you told them that President Trump.
This green-eyed guy is so upset right now. He is so upset. He's like, say what I want you to say!
But then, you went on and they had slight variations as to what you told them. But then you said that, to Ambassador Taylor, that President Zelensky himself, not the Prosecutor General, needed to clear things up in public or there would be a stalemate. And Mr. Morrison recounted something similar. You don't have any reason to doubt that both of their very similar recollections of the conversations they had with you, do you, Ambassador Sondland?
Let me break that down.
Okay, let me slow down what you said to make sure that you're not tripping up what I'm trying to say.
The no quid pro quo was my effort to respond to Ambassador Taylor's concerns, to go to President Trump. Apparently Ambassador Taylor had access to Secretary Pompeo. He did not have access to President Trump. So I made the phone call. I said, what do you want? President Trump responded with what I put in the text. And then I strongly encouraged Ambassador Taylor to take it up with the Secretary. And he responded, I agree, when I said that. As far as the other part of your question relating to whether or not the prosecutor could make the statement or Zelensky could make the statement, I don't recall who told me, whether it was Volker, or whether it was Giuliani, or whether it was President Trump. It's got to be Zelensky, it can't be the prosecutor. But that's what I relayed. Whoever I got that information from, I relayed that to, I believe, both Ambassador Taylor and to Mr. Morrison.
But as of September 9th, you understood, did you not, that
but you
President
did,
Trump,
we're cognizant of the information, right?
Required that President Zelensky make a public announcement of the two investigations that President Trump cared about in order to get both the White House meeting and to release the security assistance. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
That concludes our 45 minutes. I now recognize Mr. Nunes.
He had to open a bottle of water immediately. He was like, oh God, I'm gonna snap this motherfucker's neck. Oh, that dude gave him the runaround so hard. Oh, he was so angry. His green eyes got so wide and bright. He was like, "You don't stop fucking with me." Ah. Millionaires. They could talk their way out of a plastic bag.
Member, following those statements, you heard from Gordon Sondland, who spoke for around 42 minutes as an opening statement, and then it was 45 minutes by the majority, the Democratic Council, and Adam Schiff leading the questioning of Ambassador Sondland. When they come back from this break, it'll be the minority's turn. Devin Nunes, the top Republican on the
favors the president on his re-election. So I think a very important moment in the history of this
Oh, that was hilarious. Antonio, stop. Come on. I really wish sometimes they would actually cuss at each other and yell. I would really feel like then they would really care.
They would come to order. I now recognize Ranking Member Nunes and Minority Council for 45 minutes of questions.
Hey, your favorite guy's coming on.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Your
For
favorite
those of
guy's
you
coming
watching
on.
at home,
I know this is who you
that
stayed
was
up
not
for.
a bathroom break. That was actually a chance for the Democrats to go out and hold a press conference. Ambassador, for all the supposed bombshells that were there.
Supposed bombshells.
I want to get back to the facts of the matter here. And the thing that the Democrats have been unwilling to accept is that their operatives got campaign dirt from Ukrainians in the 2016 election. So they know it. They know it's true. We have financial records that show it. So Democrats were heavily involved working with Ukrainians to dirty up the Trump campaign in 2016. So Ambassador, I want to go through just a few of the incidents that we know. I know you may not know all about them. You may know about them now. But I want to walk through some of those examples of why the president may be very upset with Ukraine and think that they're a country that's out to get him, as I think both you've said that and Ambassador Volker have said that from that May 23rd meeting. The first question I have is, were you aware of the anti-Trump efforts by DNC operative Alexandra Chalupa?
I am not aware.
So in 2000, there was a
DNC operative Alexander
article
Chalupa.
that also quotes Ukrainian parliamentarian Artemenko saying, quote, "It was clear that they were supporting, meaning Ukraine, supporting Hillary Clinton's candidacy. And they did everything from organizing meetings with the Clinton team to publicly supporting her to criticizing Trump. I think that they simply didn't meet with the Trump campaign because they thought Hillary would win." You know that Ukrainian official by any chance?
I don't.
That? Were you aware that then Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. Chalet wrote an op-ed in The Hill during the 2016 presidential campaign criticizing then candidate Trump?
Not aware.
But you know that now after the last few months.
Correct.
So probably one of the more disturbing ones is the Ukraine Internal Affairs Minister, Avakov, mocked and disparaged then candidate Trump on Facebook and Twitter. Were you aware that Sergei Lyshenko, a Ukrainian parliamentarian, admitted that part of his motivation in spreading the information about the so-called Black Ledger, a disputed document purporting to reveal corruption in that former Trump campaign official, was to undermine the Trump candidacy?
I wasn't aware.
So you may be familiar, the Black Ledger was used in the 2016 election to dirty up a campaign associate, and later...
Is this
Mueller
just like
used
spreading
that
random
evidence
propaganda?
for election.
I mean,
So knowing all these facts from high-ranking Ukrainian officials, Ambassador, probably makes a little more sense now as to why the president may think that there's
are they
problems
facts?
with Ukraine, and Ukraine was out to get him. Is that correct?
I understand your point, yes, Chairman.
You said in your deposition, I'm just going to make sure this was your, just read it back to you.
I mean, I'm not saying
Page
that there are no
279
bad
or
liberals.
the legal team.
Definitely not going to say
Quote,
that.
they are all corrupt.
Oh.
This is your... this is
I'm
what
just
you
going to
said
say,
in
are
your
these facts?
conversation with the
Do we
president.
have a fact
This is
checker on
your
deck?
words about what the president told you.
This is the May 23rd meeting.
That's correct. They're all corrupt. They're all terrible people, and you know, I don't want to spend any time with that. And he also said they tried to take me down.
That's
Now,
correct.
They tried to take him down. I think any logical person that wants to do 2 + 2 = 4 games would say that that was in the 2016 election, wasn't it?
I believe that's what he was referring to, yes.
Right. So during all this time, and remember, in the spring, Democrats' Russia hoax witch hunt is still ongoing. They're still claiming that President Trump is a Russian agent. They're out to get President Trump at the time.
I don't
His
think anyone
personal
thinks
attorney
he's an
has
agent
been
for Russia.
No, he's just
interested
an
in trying to
opportunist.
figure out
Yeah,
who are these
no one
Ukrainians
thinks
that are trying to
that
get to my
Trump
campaign.
has the wherewithal
As
to
those
be
of
an
us
Russian
Republicans on
agent.
this committee
He would
who
be
are
the
also
greatest
trying to get to
agent.
the bottom of who were the sources in the Steele
intelligence
dossier
agent
that the
ever.
Democrats had paid for.
No one
Because of
thinks
his
House
lack of
Republicans wanted to know that
intelligence.
all through the spring and even the summer of, and even as of today, we'd still like to know. That's why we've subpoenaed the DNC operatives that they
I wouldn't
refused
even
to
say
subpoena.
intelligence. I
It was in
would
a
say
letter this morning.
wherewithal.
I doubt we'll see those subpoenas. We want to know exactly, get to the bottom of exactly who were these Democratic operatives that were dirtying up the Trump campaign in 2016. And they just can't get over that the president would send his personal attorney over there to try to get to the bottom of that. And Ambassador, you had very few dealings with Rudy Giuliani, a few text
They
messages.
didn't support that, he
A few
said.
text messages and a few phone calls.
Right. So the whistleblower trying to put together here with their timeline, they seem to have a timeline problem because the whistleblower that only they know, who they won't subpoena, who clearly Mr. Vindman knows, who they blocked testimony yesterday from, would not allow Mr. Vindman to answer our questions. That whistleblower says on July 25th that there were all these promises being made. Yet I forget what they call it, the drug deal that the three amigos were cooking up seems to be their latest. You're part of the three amigos in the drug deal, Ambassador. Were you aware of any drug deal on July 25th when the phone call actually occurred?
I don't know about any drug deal.
Right.
You deserve
And
to be
did you know
accused
you're
of
part
one
of the
for
Three
calling
Amigos?
yourself the Three Amigos.
I am. I'm a proud part of the Three Amigos.
And that's the same thing Ambassador Volker said.
You
yesterday.
deserve to be called
Because by the time the phone
be
call
accused
that
of a drug
supposedly
deal for
whistleblower
being
claims
three
was the reason, was
white
the original quid pro
politicians
quo,
over 50,
has now got down
calling
to
yourselves
we're
the Three Amigos.
now a month later
You
where you're
deserve it.
involved and their quid pro quo has gotten down to the low level of, well, they want a statement. You didn't even know about anything to do with on July 25th. You knew nothing about military aid
You deserve it.
being withheld.
I knew military
that
aid was
immature ass
withheld
behavior.
beginning, I believe, on July 18th when Ambassador Taylor told both of us that that was the case.
But you don't know about, you were not on the July 25th call.
I was not.
This isn't a Judd
Where the aid
Apatow
doesn't
movie.
come up at all.
This is real life.
Again, I just read the readout when everyone else did.
What are you doing?
Everybody's testified that was on the July 25th call, that there was no aid discussed on the July 25th
The Three Amigos
call.
movie is offensive.
So then you're in the process, you have no idea that this is tied to Burisma or anybody else. You say you don't realize that until the end of August.
I didn't realize that aid was tied. The Burisma in 2016 piece was much earlier, Ranking Member.
I'm glad you bring up Burisma, because this is another issue that the Democrats don't want to go into. They refuse to call in Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden could get to the bottom of all of this. He could come in and talk about whether or not it was appropriate for him to receive over $50,000 a month while his dad was vice president. And when they actually were able to stop and get an investigator fired. They could call in Hunter Biden, but they don't want to do it. But let's talk about Burisma, Ambassador.
Was it
I know
appropriate
you're
for
the
Hunter
ambassador
Biden to
the
be
EU.
receiving
I think
$50,000
some of the
a
members
month
later
while
will
his
get
father was
into
vice
whether or not it was
president?
appropriate for you to be in Ukraine or not. I believe it was. I think you have a clear mandate
What
to
was he
do
getting
it.
that for?
But you wouldn't be the first ambassador to actually be interested in Burisma. Did you know that in September 2015, then Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt publicly called for an investigation into Slavisky, the president of Burisma? This was the Ukrainian ambassador appointed by President Obama in Ukraine.
I wasn't aware of that, no.
You were not aware of it.
No.
So you would.
Burisma in 2016 piece was much earlier, Ranking Member.
I'm glad you bring up Burisma, because this is another issue that the Democrats don't want to go into. They refuse to call in Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden could get to the bottom of all of this. He could come in and talk about whether or not it was appropriate for him to receive over $50,000 a month while his dad was vice president. And when they actually were able to stop and get an investigator fired, they could call in Hunter Biden, but they don't want to do it. But let's talk about Burisma, Ambassador. I know you're the ambassador to the EU. I think some of the members later will get into whether or not it was appropriate for you to be in Ukraine or not. I believe it was. I think you have a clear mandate to do it. But you wouldn't be the first ambassador to actually be interested in Burisma. Did you know that in September 2015, then Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt publicly called for an investigation into Slavisky, the president of Burisma? This was the Ukrainian ambassador appointed by President Obama in Ukraine.
I wasn't aware of that, no.
You were not aware of it.
No.
So you would not be the first one to be mentioning that investigations should be done on Burisma because it happened during the Obama administration. Did you know that financial records show Burisma routed more than $3 million to the American accounts tied to Hunter Biden?
I did not know that.
Did you know that Burisma's American lawyers tried to secure a meeting with a new state prosecutor the same day his predecessor, Victor Shokin, who the vice president wanted fired, was announced?
Did not know that.
We're not going to get to the answer to many of these questions because the witnesses that need to come in and clarify exactly what the Democrats were doing in 2016, we're not going to be able to visit with those witnesses. And so it's an inconvenient truth that the Democrats don't want to admit. They're operatives that were dirtying up the Trump campaign using Ukrainian sources in 2016. And they do not want us to get to the bottom of it. They don't want you, Ambassador, to get to the bottom of it. They don't want the president's personal attorney, even though he's under a special counsel investigation that they fed into the FBI, that we've dealt with.
Now you
for
see,
over
that was
3
very
years.
important information.
They don't want to get to the bottom.
That was actually saying that the Democrats were embezzling money into Biden's son
Welcome back.
during
Your birthday on the
Obama's
17th.
late tonight, so thank you for your cooperation with the investigation.
Presidency.
Did the president ever tell you personally about any preconditions for anything?
No.
Okay, so the president never
But
told
what
you
I
about
don't
any
like is that the way he
preconditions
framed
for
it
the aid to
is
be
like,
released?
why not frame it as it
The
being
president
about
never told you about any
the
preconditions
people,
for a
the
White
American
House
citizens, instead of framing it
Personally,
about
no.
it being about the Democratic Party?
You said you didn't have your records or your
Like,
documents
you
from the State
know, he
Department,
should
but
make
if you
it
did,
about
there wouldn't be any
protecting
document or record
the
that
American citizens
ties
instead of
President
about
Trump personally
attacking
to
the
any of this,
Democratic
correct?
Party.
Boy, I don't want to
You
speculate
know?
what would be
You know,
on.
your documents are
I feel like
records.
that should be like
I
what
don't
your
recall
priority
anything like
Okay,
is
good heavens, okay.
about
You testified,
empowering your
Mr.
citizens,
Giuliani's
not attacking a
requests
party.
For a quid
About,
pro quo
you
for
know,
the White
because
House meeting.
as a citizen, I want to be informed
And
about no
you
matter what
indicated
party
you
is
believe
needed.
that was, he was evincing President Trump's interests, correct?
My contact with Mr. Giuliani began, as I said, very late in the process, after August 1st, when I was first introduced to him by text from Ambassador Volker. So we had already begun those discussions, I believe, with the Ukrainians prior to August 1st, so everything was being funneled through others, including Mr. Volker.
You testified that Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the president, correct?
That's our understanding,
But
yes.
how did you know that? Who told you?
Well, when the president says, talk to my personal attorney, and then Mr. Giuliani, as his personal attorney, makes certain requests or demands, we assume it's coming from the president. I'm not testifying that I heard the president tell Mr. Giuliani to tell us, so if that's your question.
Right, but at your deposition, you said the question was at the May 23rd meeting when the president said, go talk to Rudy. You responded, he didn't even say go talk. He said, talk to Rudy. You subsequently said it was sort of like, I don't want to talk about this.
Oh, you're the ambassador to the EU. I think some of the members later will get into.
Or a quid pro quo.
Actually, be
wouldn't have.
interested in Burisma. Did you know that in September 2015, then Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt publicly called for an
I actually want
investigation
to record what you
into
just said right here.
Slavitsky, the president of Burisma? This was the Ukrainian ambassador appointed by President Obama in Ukraine.
I wasn't aware of that, no.
You were not aware of it.
No.
So you would not be the first one to be mentioning that investigations should be done on Burisma because it happened during the Obama administration. Did you know that financial records show Burisma routed more than $3 million to the American accounts tied to Hunter Biden?
I did not know that.
Did you know that Burisma's American lawyers tried to secure a meeting with a new state prosecutor the same day his predecessor Victor Shokin, who Vice President wanted fired, was announced?
Did not know that.
Well, we're not going to get to the answer to many of these questions because the witnesses that need to come in and clarify exactly what the Democrats were doing in 2016, we're not going to be able to visit with those witnesses. And so it's an inconvenient truth that the Democrats don't want to admit. They're operatives that were dirtying up the Trump campaign using Ukrainian sources in 2016, and they do not want us to get to the bottom of it. They don't want you, Ambassador, to get to the bottom of it. They don't want the president's personal attorney, even though he's under a special counsel investigation that they fed into the FBI, that we've dealt with for over 3 years.
Antonio,
They don't want to get to the bottom of that, Ambassador.
Stop.
I think Mr. Castor has some questions.
Mr. Nunez, good morning, Ambassador. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Castor.
Welcome back. You're here all day on the 17th.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are more worried about like candidates here talking to two people instead of about other candidates
Okay,
and
so the
about
president
other
never
parties
told you
at
about
this
any
point. 'Cause
preconditions for the aid to be released.
I know.
No.
The president
Even
never
as
told
much
you
as
about
I
any
don't
preconditions
like
for a White House
others,
meeting.
Personally, no.
don't like
You said you didn't
some
have your
shit.
records or your documents from the State Department, but
I
if you
don't
did,
wanna
there
just
wouldn't be any document or
hear
record that
bashing on shit.
ties President Trump personally
Either.
to any of this, correct?
Boy, I don't want to speculate what would be.
You know,
on-
your documents or records.
I don't recall anything like that.
Okay. Good heavens, okay. You testified Mr. Giuliani's requests for a quid pro quo for the White House meeting. And you indicated that you believe that he was evincing President Trump's interests, correct?
My contact with Mr. Giuliani began, as I said, very late in the process, after August 1st, when I was first introduced to him by text from Ambassador Volker. So we had already begun those discussions, I believe, with the Ukrainians prior to August 1st, so everything was being funneled through others, including Mr. Volker.
You testified that Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the president, correct?
That's our understanding, yes.
But how did you know that? Who told you?
Well, when the president says, talk to my personal attorney, and then Mr. Giuliani, as his personal attorney, makes certain requests or demands, we assume it's coming from the president. I'm not testifying that I heard the president tell Mr. Giuliani to tell us, so if that's your question.
Right, but at your deposition, you said the question was at the May 23rd meeting when the president said, go talk to Rudy. You responded, he didn't even say go talk. He said, talk to Rudy. You subsequently said it was sort of like, I don't want to talk about this. So it wasn't an order or a direction to go talk with Mr. Giuliani, correct?
Our conclusion, and the conclusion of the three of us, was that if we did not talk to Rudy, nothing would move forward on Ukraine.
Okay. And then that was May 23rd, and then you never had any personal communications with Giuliani until August, right?
That's correct.
And Volker was handling, Ambassador Volker was he the
Volker,
primary?
Volker, Perry, and others.
My goodness, he'll make you take 8 minutes to answer one
Ambassador
damn
Volker,
question.
you testified he's
And the answer be yes.
professional diplomat, correct?
Yes, he is.
And you said you had a great relationship with him?
I do, yes.
You said he was a very smart guy?
Yes.
Ambassador Ivanovich said he's a brilliant diplomat, in fact. You agree with that?
He's pretty smart.
You stated that he's one of those people I'd hand my wallet to?
I would.
And so, did you hear his testimony yesterday?
I did not.
Okay, because
I was busy getting ready for you.
he didn't have any evidence of any of these preconditions. And he was the one most engaged with the Ukrainians, wasn't he?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, you testified, and this was his full-time job, although he was doing it for free.
He was the special envoy.
And you testified you came in and out of the events, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. At your deposition, we asked you about your communications with the president, and we asked you whether there were so many that it would be impossible to chronicle. And you said no, it wasn't that many, and we went down the path of building a list of communications you remember with the president, right?
Correct.
We talked about May 23rd in the Oval Office.
Yes.
You mentioned on July 25th, before you went to Ukraine, you called the president, but there was no material information on the 25th call, correct?
Not that I recall.
Okay, then last Friday, Mr. Holmes came in, and I guess his testimony refreshed your recollection?
Yeah, what refreshed my recollection was when you mentioned ASAP Rocky, then all of a sudden it came back to me.
You're talking about President Zelensky loving president and so forth?
Should
Well, the whole
I
thing sort of
make
came back
everything
to
weed infused for
ASAP
Thanksgiving?
And then the next time, we tried to unpack this. The next time you talked to the president was on the telephone, was September 9th, according to your deposition, right?
I may have even spoken to him on September 6th, but again, I just don't have all the records. I wish I could get them. Then I could answer your questions very easily.
Okay. But on September 9th, at least at your deposition, you were extremely clear. You called the president, you said he was feeling cranky that day, right?
He seemed very cranky.
And you said, in no uncertain terms, and this is on the heels of the Bill Taylor text, right?
Right.
And why don't you tell us, what did the president say to you on September 9th that you remember?
Well, words to the effect, I decided to ask the president the question in an open-ended fashion because there were so many different scenarios floating around as to what was going on with Ukraine. So rather than ask the president 9 different questions, is it this, is it this, is it that, I just said, what do you want from Ukraine? I may have even used a 4-letter word. And he said, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I just want Zelensky to do the right thing, to do what he ran on, or words to that effect. And that gave me the impetus to respond to Ambassador Taylor with the text that I sent. As I said to Mr. Goldman, it was not an artfully written text. I should have been more specific, put it in quotes, something like that. But basically, I wanted Mr. Taylor, Ambassador Taylor, to pick up the ball and take it from there. I had gone as far as I could go.
And you believe the president, correct?
You know what? I'm not going to characterize whether I believed or didn't believe. I was just trying to convey what he said on the phone.
Okay, and at that point in time, the pause in the aid was paused for 55 days. There was a news article in Politico on August 28th talking about it. So by that point in time, the president had been receiving calls from senators. He had been getting pressure to lift the aid, correct?
That's what I understand, yes.
I want to turn back to your opener on page 5, under when you talk about, in the absence of any credible explanation for the suspension of aid, I later came to believe that the resumption of security aid would not occur until there was a public statement from Ukraine committing to the investigations, correct?
Correct.
And you acknowledge that this is speculation, right?
It was a presumption.
Okay. That it was a guess. In fact, I think you even said this morning.
Well, I want to say that it goes back to Mr. Goldman's point, or Chairman Schiff's 2 + 2 = 4 in my mind at that point.
Okay, but you didn't have any evidence of that, correct?
Other than the aid wasn't being released and we weren't getting anywhere with the Ukrainians.
Okay, but did Ambassador Volker clue you in that was the issue? I mean, this is a pretty high, this is a pretty serious conclusion you've reached without precise evidence.
Well, I sent that email to Secretary Pompeo to set up a potential meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky in Warsaw.
Oh.
And when I referred to the logjam, I referred to the logjam in a very inclusive way. Everything was jammed up at that point, and Secretary Pompeo essentially gave me the green light to brief President Zelensky about making those announcements.
Okay, we can turn to that. And then that was your email dated what date?
Do you have the page there?
Well, your email to Secretary Pompeo.
But see, he also won't let
Was that on
somebody
August
talk
11th?
him out of his position. I like that too.
16.
August 22nd.
Okay, so you're asking Secretary Pompeo whether we should block time and work. I mean, is there any discussion of specific investigations? Is there any discussion of Biden or Burisma or anything linking to aid in this email that you sent to Pompeo?
No, this was a proposed briefing that I was going to give President Zelensky. And I was going to call President Zelensky and ask him to say what is in this email, and I was asking essentially President Pompeo's permission to do that, which he said yes.
But at that point in time, we're talking about investigations into the origins of the 2016 election. We're not talking about anything to do with Joe Biden.
Joe Biden did not come up.
Okay. Stepping back a page to your email to the State Department on August 11th, you email Secretary Pompeo and you say, Kurt and I negotiated a statement from Zelensky to be delivered for our review in a day or two. The question I have here is that, that statement never was issued. And in fact, Ambassador Volker has testified that he didn't think it was a good idea, and ultimately the Ukrainians didn't think it was a good idea. And so the statement never reached a finalized state.
That's correct.
But even if it had, it doesn't talk about Biden.